Welcome back, everybody. Again, coming to you live today. Well, probably not whenever you're watching it, from the Grand Valley Speech Lab behind me, the place that you would be going this summer, but now we'll go virtually. So be sure to check out the video on how to access the Speech Lab this summer online. Also, you could still, if you need to, visit the Writing Center or the Research Partners online. We're all part of the knowledge market together. So, anyway, I just wanted to get back a little closer to what we're used to. So, this video is going to cover Chapter 7, which is informative style. Here, we're going to talk about when you get up to speak, there's some things that you should keep in mind. Now, the stuff that we're going to discuss is largely applicable to both informative and persuasive speaking, but it's specific to informative in some ways, and I'll highlight those for you. So, just because we're calling this informative style, it's really more of a placeholder so that you're using this content to prepare for the first speech. But as you move forward, you could use it for the persuasive as well. So let's jump in. So if you have your packet, this is over on page 27. As you see, we've got a PowerPoint that goes along with this one. And so let's just start here at the top. This word objectivity. If you think about what that means, it's, as you can see on the screen, judgment based on observable phenomena and uninfluenced by opinion, emotion, or personal preferences or prejudices. Now, that's a long sort of way around to say that objectivity tries to block out any judgments that you personally might feel. It's the opposite of subjectivity, of course. So when you're delivering an informative speech, by the end of that speech, we should not really know how you specifically feel about a topic. Now, having said that, let me give you a couple of examples where it gets blurry. If you are, for example, talking about sexual assault on college campuses, I don't mean that we shouldn't know how you feel about sexual assault. I hope that we can clearly tell that you are against them. However, we shouldn't know your plan or your feelings about the best way to address that issue. So again, you could say things like one plan to fix this later in the persuasive would be to give life sentences to people who sexually assault others. Another one might be to have more police officers. Another one might be to have more emergency stations on campus. Whatever your way of handling that is, we don't need to know that for the informative. We just need to know facts about what's going on. So, with anything like that, animal cruelty, donating blood, that sort of stuff, hopefully we're all on the same page more or less with if those things are good or bad. But as far as specific responses to them, that's what you should leave out. Now, the second point that you'll see here is conversational style. And when you think conversational style, this should really apply to both informative and persuasive speaking. It's really key here. And I like to cover these two things before we get to verbal delivery and then later nonverbal, because they're so important. I mean, the first one, objectivity, you've got to be objective for an informative presentation, but conversational style is so valuable. You see on the slide a picture of Bill Clinton. Now, whether you love him, hate him, don't really know much about him besides the Monica Lewinsky scandal, it doesn't matter. The fact is, he was a great conversational style speaker. He's from, of course, Arkansas, and he has that southern accent, and he is what people call plain spoken. Now, I'm not telling you when you come up to give your presentation that you should dumb things down for us and sound like, oh, well, shucks, folks, I don't know. I'm just up here telling you what I've been told by the experts. No, but you also shouldn't sound pretentious, right? You don't want to sound like you're trying way too hard. There'll be a time and a place for that, and we'll talk about it in just a minute. But for being conversational, you want to be in that nice Goldilocks zone, the happy medium between formal and relaxed. So, the way I like to think of it is if you imagine someone real in your life who you are very comfortable around, so you don't try to be someone you're not or act a certain way when you're with them, but that you also respect very much and you want them to see you in a positive light. How do you talk to that person? This might be a parent, grandparent, professor, clergy, I don't know, whoever it might be, mentor, coach. So, whoever that person is and the way that you interact with them, more than likely, is a good start to get to your conversational style. Now, I used to tell folks just talk like you're talking to your best friend. That is terrible advice. I won't give that anymore because I realized if I talked to you the way that I talk to my best friend, I would be fired already. Um, so you probably don't want to do that. I don't know how terrible you and your friends are, but the idea here is that you aren't extreme one way or another. It feels like, and you've seen this happen in a presentation. It feels like the speaker is talking to you or with you instead of talking at you, and there's a big difference there. And so try to find that conversational style, especially for an audience of less than 100 people, and that's the majority of all speeches you'll ever give, if not all of them. All right. So, moving from those two sort of overarching ideas, because those will be applied throughout, let's talk about verbal delivery. Now, when you think verbal delivery, I want you to remember that clarity is key. I would rather you speak plain or in a very understandable, easy to follow way than I would for you to sort of show us that you're very intelligent. I know you're very intelligent. That's why you're here. But clarity is key. So that gets us to the next item of who is this audience that you're speaking to. Now, if you are talking to a group of experts in a field and you want to show them that you are also an expert, this happens when you're defending like a dissertation to get your PhD. You're in a room full of PhDs who basically you want to join the club to see if you can defend your dissertation appropriately. And the way that it was described to me, and it felt a lot like that, it's like a gang beat in, except they don't physically hit you. They just throw lots of questions at you, and you've got to be able to fight those off, to respond to those. In that situation, you want to be complex. You want to use the jargon of that field. But when you have a general audience of mixed backgrounds in terms of their understanding of a topic or their education levels or their IQs, whatever it might be, you want to really avoid complex language, avoid jargon, and speak it at almost 10th grade level. Now, that's not, again, 10th grade level is not to say that people are stupid. That's not what I'm implying. What I'm saying is that when people take reading tests or if you review a number of Word documents where it'll tell you your reading or writing levels, it's usually about 10th grade overall in America, not for college students. So if you keep it on that level, you're less likely to go over someone's head. And if you do that, you're going to not connect with them anymore. They will either be trying to figure out what the hell you're talking about, or they're going to be judging you for, oh, well, I bet they think they just know everything, don't they? Well, either way, they're not listening to you anymore. So if you keep it nice and plain, you can grab attention and hold on to it a little better. There's a saying: don't use a $10 word where a 10-cent word will do. The prime example is the word use versus utilize. I watch these. I watch the news all the time, so I'm watching these coronavirus press briefings, and Dr. Birx is the one with the scarves. She's on there and she uses the word utilize 6 times, and I realize she is a world-class medical scientist, and that's probably the way she was taught in hard sciences. But if I could give her one piece of advice when addressing the American public, it's stop saying utilize, just say use. So again, little things can make a big difference in how you're perceived in terms of your audience's view. So the next item here is to use correct words. And you might be wondering, if you haven't already, why the hell is Mike Tyson standing there looking foreboding? Now, the reason I put Mike on here is because Mike was, I guess still is, but definitely during his heyday of boxing, was known to use not real words, right? He would just kind of make them up. So instead of saying things like pandemonium, he would say things like pandalirium. And so he would always just get some things mixed up that most folks would understand aren't quite that way around. Now, this is usually in a post-fight interview and everything's going, 1,000 miles an hour, but you don't want to come up and use an incorrect word. You probably have a friend who uses incorrect words. They'll have something that they say frequently that when you hear it, let's just come back over here. When you hear it, it gets on your nerves. I had a friend in high school, Will, and Will had a girlfriend who was very controlling. She would call Will once an hour if she wasn't with him, wanted to know what he was doing, where he was at, who he was with, the whole 9 yards. So we're hanging out one day, me, him, and our friend Matt, and the girlfriend calls and calls again, calls again, calls again, and you can hear Will trying to appease her. It was Will wasn't going to do any better in the looks department than this girlfriend, and hasn't to this day. But the idea was he was trying to hang on to her, so he was playing along, and it was, oh no, babe, no, no, it's fine, trust me, blah blah blah, it's fine, I love you. And then he would get off the phone, and he would get angry because she was so controlling, and he would say, guys, I just can't stand it. She is so facetious. Facetious? I told him, I actually, the first time he said it, that I caught it, I said, no, dude, I don't think so. She sounded very serious to me. Facetious is sort of like sarcastic, very similar. So I thought he meant like she didn't mean all that stuff that she was saying. And I'm thinking, yeah, man, she did. But he would facetious, facetious, facetious all the time, meaning controlling or angry or, overbearing. And eventually it was just sort of like, oh yeah, man, she's facetious. Your friends may do something similar. I don't know what that might be, but irregardless is another one. It's just regardless. There's a number of these things that people say. So you might ask yourself, who do I know that does that? And there's probably someone. All right. Last thing here is to, when you're thinking of verbal delivery, avoid biased language. Now, I've got a chart here for you, and this is not exhaustive by any means, but it is a start at thinking of exclusive or biased, outdated language, and then bringing that into more current times for inclusivity and to be non-biased. I've got these broken down into three large categories. You could do it in a number of ways. Again, this isn't the end all be all, but it's a step in that direction. So you can go through the left side and see that in the past we've used lots of words that, for example, end in man. Policeman, fireman, postman, mailman, chairman, salesman, businessman, congressman, anchorman, weatherman, cameraman, spokesman, foreman, clergyman, freshman, hitman, layman. All of those man words, those and many others, implied that only a male could do that job. And we know that that's just not the case anymore for any of these. I mean, policeman, we have police officer. Fireman, firefighter. Mailman or postman, postal worker, mail carrier. Chair instead of chairman. I don't know why people sometimes still say chairperson. I just think chair is easier. Usually shorter is better. Salesman, salesperson. Businessman, businessperson. Congressman, representative. Anchorman, or an anchor, like on TV, right? Weatherman, meteorologist. Cameraman, photographer or videographer. Spokesman, spokesperson. Foreman, a foreperson, or the leader, manager, supervisor. Those are all the same basic meaning. Instead of clergyman, clergy, because women are, in clergy now. Freshman, this is one that we still use frequently, but yeah, first year student seems to make more sense. Literally, freshman was when you were a first year college student and you were male because only males went to college, back in the day. To me, as an advisor, it makes more sense because I can't tell you how many times I've sat down to advise a student and I'll say, what year are you? And they'll say, well, I just finished my third year, but I'm technically a senior according to my credits. That's not what I need to know. Are you first, second, third, or fourth year student? And that helps me get to help you faster. So, and it just seems easier to say 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. But we all know those. Again, none of these, if you hear someone say anchorman, doesn't mean that they're a rampant sexist. That's not what I'm saying. But there are times when this could be inappropriate, and we'll come back. Um, Hitman, because women kill people too. Assassin. Layman, layperson or non-expert. Then we've got some that we used to differentiate here. Waitress and waiter. Now we just say server. Stewardess and steward on airplanes, right? Flight attendants. Actor, actress. Actor. We just always use that. In fact, if you watch the Oscars, they'll say things like, here are the nominees for leading female actor in a whatever role. So that's how they're highlighting that, just female actor, male actor. Then host and hostess, just host. It's very similar to actor. Now, gender, you have seen, you may use your pronouns. If you don't, you've at least seen them on someone's email, I imagine, on the signature line. Him, her, he, she, his, hers versus them, they, and theirs. At the speech lab, for example, we never put in he or her or his and hers, she and he. We just always say the student and they. It makes more sense to us, and it actually comes from a mistake that happened once. We had a student who was in the lab waiting in our waiting area to have a consultation, and this student was biologically male and was a transgender female. And so she was sitting there waiting for her consultation, and I'll make up a name. It was like, say Bruce. And one of our consultants looked at the screen and saw that the name that was in the system from Grand Valley was Bruce. And so they stood up and said, all right, Bruce, are you ready? And no one moved. And, oh, is there no Bruce here? Bruce? And then finally the woman stood up and was like, oh, yeah, sorry, that's me. And then went to the back. And it was an embarrassing moment for her. So we now use last names if we're calling someone out in the center itself. And we don't need to worry about he, him, hers, and hers. Just them, they, theirs. Seems easier. In our culture, we're what's called a low ambiguity tolerant culture, which means we don't tolerate not knowing who or what someone is, whether that's male, female, if that's gay or straight, if that is you name it, right? If you have someone who is not clearly white or black, people or some specific group, people will wonder what they are, and it's kind of disgusting, but it's part of our culture at the same time. But I think in our speaking situations, we need to be very cautious about how we approach that. You've got the outdated hermaphrodite, which is, you're born with maybe both sets of sex organs that's intersexed. A sex change, gender confirmation surgery, or a transition. Girl, boy, woman, man. Now, that's on there because of the age factor. The oldest girl or boy is 17 years, 364 days. That's the oldest girl or boy ever. You can ask, like, well, when do you become a man? When do you become a woman? And it's nothing to do with about certain events in your life, especially your sexual life or whatever it might be. But it's legally when you become an adult at 18. That's why in high school you have girls and boys sports, and in college you have women and men's sports. So I put this on here for the reason mainly that, I guess there's two. The big one is men calling adult women girls. Now, is this a problem for everyone? No. And if it's used in a way that is innocent, it's usually okay. This is something that the motivation really plays a big role in how it's going to be perceived. But one time, this is a true story for me. I was at a insurance agency. I was renewing my car insurance, and the man who ran the agency was an older man, probably 60. So he called me to the back. I go back there, fill the paperwork out, and he says to me at the end, "Take this to the girls up front, and they'll take care of you from there." So I said, "Okay, thanks," and I walk up to the front. Now, I had just left a grad class on gender equality, and I was, fired up and ready to go. And so I walk to the front, and I see these two women that are working that at the time were like my mom's age. And I thought, should I just make a scene here about this girl thing? And then in my moment, I thought, yeah, I'm going to do it. So I go back to his office and I said, sir, I'm sorry, I don't see any girls out there. And he said, oh, really? Yeah, they're not there? And so he walks with me and he goes, oh, yeah, right there. Yeah, either one of those two girls can help you. And I made a little bit of an ass of myself and said, oh, girls. No, I see. When you said girls, I was looking for little girls. I didn't know that you could have little girls working here. And just gave him this, annoyed look. And so then I turned to look at the two women, thinking that they were going to be like looking at me like I'm their hero or something. And it was quite the opposite. They were looking at me like, what are you doing, guy? Like, stop it, get out of here. So, it's not always something that you do and it's a negative. A lot of it depends on who you're speaking to and how they take it. But again, in a public speaking setting is what we're referring to here. Remember, you don't want to accidentally, excuse me, refer to a group of women as girls and they take that in a very troubled way, right? So careful there. The other thing is with men, it's much less frequent. But if, for example, you have a black man or a group of black men and you use the term boys, I know in Michigan there wasn't slavery. There's still racism, of course, but having lived all over the South and coming here from Mississippi, if you call a black man boy in the South, it's basically the equivalent of using the N word. And it comes from back in slave days. That's the men. To be a man, you needed to be white, and everybody else was a boy. It's to the point where my college roommate throughout college was a black guy, and his dad's name was Manny, and his father, my roommate's grandfather, named Manny. We call him Man. That because his grandfather had gone through life being called boy, and he thought, if I name him Man, then that's what people are going to call him. And this is a serious issue for a lot of folks. So just be careful with that kind of stuff. It's usually not done in any sort of evil intended way. Girls' night out, Saturdays are for the boys, that kind of stuff. It's fine. Just be aware in public speaking that that's one of those differences between conversations and speeches where you'll want to tighten things up a little bit. I see that I skipped homosexual. That's way out of date now. LGBTQ, gay man, lesbian woman, that kind of thing is much more acceptable. Be specific if possible, or just say LGBTQ community. Some people even go LGBTQIA plus. I mean, it's up to you. But homosexual, it's technically a medical diagnosis that you have a mental disorder. That's where that word comes from. So yeah, I would avoid that one if I were you. Last but not least, for race, there's usually a descriptor, like a black man, but there usually doesn't need to be. Now, I just used it when I was talking about my old roommate, but it was, again, applicable to the story. What I'm talking about here is, unless there's a clear need for this racial descriptor in the story that you're telling or in the message that you're sending, we can probably just say, oh yeah, there was a little boy, little girl, there was a man, there was a woman, there was an older person, whatever it might be. We don't need their race in front of them, because then that makes part of who they are, which we are. That is part of our identity, but it brings it out when it doesn't necessarily need to be. Case in point here, one of my mentors, of two that I really look up to, she graduated college now, but her daughter was in high school at the time, and she went to a restaurant with her daughter, my mentor, and her mother. And my mentor is one of the least racist white women I've ever met in my life. Again, using white because it pertains to the story. But just come back over. They were sitting at a table, and a group of guys came in and were up ordering the food. And the guys were both black and white, and Hispanic. And so the daughter was actually dating one of the guys. And so she says to her mother, oh, that's my boyfriend. And her mom hadn't met him yet. And so she was looking at the line and she goes, oh, which one is he? I said, he's the one with the red shirt on. She was like, the red shirt? I don't see anybody with a red shirt. I said, no, he's got the red shirt with the black hat on. The red shirt with the black hat. oh, the black guy. And that's how she realized, oh my God, even someone who is working actively to be against racism can still have those biases. She didn't see that guy first because she assumed her daughter was dating a white dude. Again, this is stuff that in your own personal life you're going to make your own choices about. But in a public speaking setting where you have a mixed audience in terms of background, feelings, that kind of deal, be careful. Last one, real quick, with the it's not on the list. It didn't make it, but I've seen this literally happen. The same mentor I'm talking about, Amber Kinzer. I am working at East Tennessee State University, and I'm in the mail room getting my mail. In walks into the main office area the guy that delivers the paper, like the copy paper. So he comes in with his paper, and Kinzer and another female professor, Dr. Dorgan, are having a conversation, and Kinzer is sitting in a chair with the back in front of her. So she's sitting backwards in a chair with her legs open, and she's wearing jeans. And the guy comes in and he says, "Good afternoon, ladies." Kinzer was having a bad day, and her response to him was, "Do I look like a effing lady to you?" And then threw the chair and walked away. And the guy left fast, like he didn't know what he had done wrong. So this guy came every week. The next week, she figured out, oh my God, I'm sorry, I've done something terrible here. I overreacted. So she bought this guy literally flowers, gift cards, candy. Like she was gonna be. I'm so sorry. He didn't show up again the next week. There was a different guy that came, and she said, "Oh, where's the normal one?" I said, "Yeah, no, he just said that he didn't want this route anymore, and so they switched him." And so, again, is it bad to call someone ladies or gentlemen or that kind of thing? Not likely, but again, if that kind of negative experience can happen from such a good place, what could happen elsewhere? It's like if you say to someone, "You look like you've lost weight." So you're saying I was fat before. If it's me, I just say, "Oh, thanks. Yeah, I haven't, but I appreciate it." All right. On with our information here. Let's move to nonverbal delivery now. This is on page 28. And we've got some of the basic stuff you would expect with, things like eye contact, movement, gestures, that kind of deal. We'll come up to another one at the end here that is nonverbal, but it deals with your voice. So, start us off with eye contact. Eye contact is very important during a presentation. It, to me, is one of the most important elements of being a good speaker. Why is that? Well, when you're sending out a message in a public speaking setting, you're trying to either convince that audience to believe you on your informative information or to agree with you from your persuasive position, right? To change your attitude, belief, values, behavior. So when you make eye contact in our culture, you are communicating first honesty. You may have had a parent at some point when you lied to them, or at least they thought you lied to them. Say something like, "Can you look me in the eyes and tell me that?" And that's because we have this connection in America with eye contact and honesty. So if you're not looking at your audience, they question if you're being truthful. Second, eye contact communicates social attraction. Now, this isn't physical or sexual attraction necessarily. It's usually not. It's usually just that idea of, like, I like them. They seem like a decent person. And when you're making that eye contact, people trust you more. There's the honesty. Therefore, they like you more. There's the social attraction. And last, it communicates attention. When we're paying attention to someone, we look at them. And I've got a 3-year-old son, and whenever I need to correct him on something, I get down on his level and I tell him, whatever I need to tell him, what he's done wrong or how to do something different. But I always have to remind him, hey, buddy, look at me, because I want to make that connection with him. And it's the same not only for the speaker looking at the audience, but it's the same for the audience looking at the speaker. When you're in an actual face-to-face situation as an audience member, always look at the speaker. You may be thinking, boy, I hope nobody looks at me if I'm ever in that situation. You really don't, because that's so awkward when no one's looking at you. You wonder, what am I doing wrong? Why is no one looking at me? And so making that eye contact is important for both uh, the audience, but most importantly for the speaker. Now, if you're up in front of a room and eye contact is an issue for you, I get it. I really do. There's a couple things that might help. First, scan the room and focus on critical points. So you could do that. Scanning the room, meaning if you can't look anyone in the eye because you're afraid it's going to throw you off in terms of anxiety, sort of draw an imaginary line above everyone's head and scan the room on that line. That sounds strange, but it won't look great for the audience, but it looks better than you looking down the entire time or reading. Most people will think, I wonder why they're not making eye contact with me, but they are making eye contact with everyone else. So, it can definitely be done. Um, we'll come back to this in just a second with another method, but I want to stay on this outline track here, where I'll say this with attention getters, for example, the introduction. Try to read that as little as possible, especially the attention getter. If you can focus on the attention getter and not reading that part, you're going to be off to a good start. When you're off to a good start, you often stay on that good path. So, try to make eye contact, memorize if necessary the attention getter as much as you can. Not the whole speech, just that part. Later in the speech, if you're making sort of a very crucial argument or an emotional appeal, which we'll talk about when we get to persuasion, but it's something important, something that you really want the audience to take away, whether it's informative or persuasive. Look at your audience. You can't read it and, think that they're going to trust you. You've got to look at them and say it. I bought a car once. My wife and I went out and bought it was a Nissan Rogue or something like that. And we went. My wife decided what she wanted. She picked, color and features and all that. And so we go to a car lot and told him what we wanted. And so the guy, the salesperson that was helping us, comes out and has a little cheat sheet. He's got a little notes in his pocket. And so I'm like, yeah, tell us about this car. He said, okay, hold on. Pulls out his notes and he starts going through. Now I buy a lot of cars, and that's the first time I'd seen anyone use a cheat sheet, and it made me think, what is this guy missing? What doesn't he know that he is missing? Is there something that it's going to hurt me as the buyer? So we thanked him and told him we'd think about it, and went across town to another car lot, found the same car. This time, it was a woman who was our salesperson, happened to be a Grand Valley grad. That's why I emphasize that. And I said, tell us about this car. And without pause, she just went right into it. And that's who we bought the car from. We probably honestly could have saved not even, maybe $300-400 at the other place. But no, I'd rather go somewhere where I feel confident in their abilities to tell me true things and not leave things out. And again, no malice with leaving something out from the guy who didn't know what he was really doing without his notes. It just could be a byproduct of that. So make sure that you're looking at your audience when you really need them to hang with you and believe you. Now, having said all that, it is important to make eye contact, but it's also important to use your notes appropriately. When you go up, you should have some form of notes. I will put another video up just specifically about notes. It'll be like 5 minutes long. But I want you to use your notes to stay on track and to make sure that you're not getting, sort of distracted by a different point, because you want to stick to the time limit. So notes will help you do that. Also, if you have a quotation or a statistic that you want to give us, I prefer that you read that. I mean, think about how that looks. Let me just come back over. If I'm telling you and I say something like, 64% of Americans believe the thing, is that a real number? I don't know. But even if it's not a real number, it should be if you're using it. But if I've got a piece of paper here, you can't see the paper. Can you see my phone? Sort of. But if I look at my notes, I say something like, This is a huge problem in America. In fact, and let me get this correct for you here. I'll bring up my notes. 64% of Americans think this thing. And it's letting the audience know that I care about being truthful, not that I don't know what I'm talking about. And that can be very beneficial for your audience. Sorry, I just want to make sure for some reason my computer and my phone aren't charging. There we go. Didn't want this to cut off in the middle. Next up, what are some obstacles to making good eye contact? The first is anxiety. We talked about, looking just above everyone. What I will tell you, don't look at everybody's hair. That's a mistake because people have different heights. And if you look out, top of one person's head is going to be the next person behind them's eyes. So look on above that. Or you could do what's called the two friends method. That's where you might have a friend on one side of the room and then a friend on the other, ideally one in the middle, the three friend method. And you'll look at those people and you'll keep going back and forth. It looks, again, like you're spreading that attention around the room, but in reality, you're looking at one or two people or three. The other big obstacle, and this is the one that I see the most, is poor preparation. You have to read the speech because you don't know what's in it clearly enough to do it without or with minimal notes. But I'll tell you this, reading a piece of paper is not giving a speech. It's not. That's a reading. It's not a speaking event. So, okay. If you're unfamiliar with some of the elements of your speech, be sure to practice. Practice. That's the best way to make sure that you're going to give yourself a shot at good eye contact. All right, movement. Here you see on the PowerPoint, Steve Jobs talking about an Apple product here. And Steve Jobs is what I picked, or who I picked, because he was known to use the entire stage. He was a technology guy who made some of the great products we use today, but he also was a very good presenter, and he would show off his ability to interact with the audience, but he did that mainly through moving around the stage. You can see that he stands, he sits, he goes over to a table sort of situation or cabinet there and interacts with that. He uses a prop. So movement is important. Whoops. Come back. It's always hard to go from one to the other. Let's talk about some of the key ideas here. So why does movement matter? Well, it matters because it helps the audience pay attention. If you stay in one place for too long, you sort of blend in and they get tired of looking in one spot, honestly. And it demonstrates that you have a level of confidence, that they can trust you, that they can like you, because we like confident people. If you seem agitated or pacing, you don't want to do that. We'll come back to that one. But if you also just stand locked in concrete in one spot, you don't seem very confident. And while that doesn't mean that you're not telling the truth or you don't feel passionately about your topic, it doesn't give off those sort of positive signals that an audience needs. So movement can help you do that. Now, what you see there next on the PowerPoint anyway, are podiums are rare. And they are. You see the picture there of Dr. King at the I Have a Dream speech, the March on Washington speech. And he couldn't move because he is behind those microphones. And if he moved, no one would be able to hear his message. That's not likely to happen with you. You are probably going to give speeches or presentations at work, in a conference room, or if you want to get civically involved at like a town hall meeting, those sorts of things. I hope if you get to Dr. King's level, don't forget me. Let me know. I'll come help you write speeches. But you're not usually going to have that podium to use. And some people hide behind it. They hold on to it. I mean, you don't want that. And if we were in the real classroom, we wouldn't use a podium for any of our speeches because, again, it's not realistic. But the key thing for thinking about how much to move or not to move without the podium is to keep control in mind. And you'll see over on the notes, avoid pacing and uncontrolled movement when possible. I'm about to give you 3 different ways to move during a presentation that are all effective. But if you do too many or too much of any of them, it goes way wrong, way quick. So let's talk about this. I've broken these up into 3 categories: easy, medium, or hard. So it's sort of like a video game. Which level do you want to play on? If you like to do easy, you could do what I call the 2-step method. The 2-step method is just what it sounds like. Come back over if I can find myself. Oh, there I am. 2-step method. I mean, it's kind of hard here, but if these are my feet, I'm going to start out, it's kind of just a feet and a head. I'm starting out here and I'm talking to the middle of the room and I'm scanning side to side because I want to talk to everybody, that are not right dead center. Then as I move to my first main point, I might say something like, so to begin, let's talk about the thing. And as I say those words, my feet might redirect to about a 45-degree turn. So to begin, let's first talk about the thing. And now I'm pointed this way. My face is pointed this way. My body is oriented that way. But I'm still remembering people are over here and I'm looking at them. As I go to my next point, now that you know about this, let's move on and talk about the next thing. I'm going to come over here, but I'm still going to remember these folks. Then I might come back to the center. I mean, the idea here is that you move, you do the 2-step, 1, 2, 1, 2 on the transition, not throughout the whole thing. Then it becomes like the 2-step dance, right? It's like you've got a jam in your head and you're just sort of, doing the 2-step side to side, and it looks distracting for an audience. So you want to avoid that if at all possible. If you want to play on medium, you can do what's called the speaker's triangle. So if you want to think about what this might look like, really don't like having a visual whiteboard, but I mean, think about a triangle, right? If you think of that back wall where my thumbs are as the board, the whiteboard, put an eraser on either end back here on the tray, on the extreme ends of the tray, and then the peak here would be right in between the front 2 tables in your room that you're presenting in. Okay, so now you've got 1 point in the front. Sorry about that. You've got the 2 points in the back wings. Start dead center in that triangle. So, you know what? Let's see. I bet. Let's do this. I can't draw with this, can I? Never mind. Let's come over here for a quick second. Where did it go? Okay. So let's say here is the blackboard tray, the whiteboard tray. You might put an eraser here, and you put an eraser over here. This is an overhead view, by the way. Then you've got a table goes there, a table that goes here. I'm thinking like the ones over in a Sable, something like that. Then you want to think about this being your third spot. And then right here is the middle. So for the speaker's triangle, you might start here and do that introduction. So you're a attention getter. By the end of the speech, you should know this and that and the other thing. So to begin, let's start talking about my first main point, whatever it is. And you might go here for that first move. And you're going to stay here. Then, now that we know more about this point, whatever it was, my first point, let's move on and talk about this next point. And so here might be your second move. And you're going to stay there. Now that you know about this one, let's finish up by talking about my third point. And here's that. So you're going to go here and you're going to stay here until you're ready to go to the conclusion. So in conclusion, and then you go back home. Right? So that's the conclusions move there. Now, where this goes wrong is when people round this like it's it's bases in baseball, and it's the first main point, they do like a full revolution or 2 or 3. You don't want to do that. Remember, whole introduction here. Let's put that down. Introduction. Then all of main point 1 here. All of main point 2 here. All of main point 3 here. And then the conclusion goes back here as well. So, and by the way, it doesn't matter if you start here and go here, 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 and there. It doesn't matter. But you probably don't want to keep going back and forth to the same spot, even if you only move when you're supposed to. So again, that's the idea. You're using the speaker's triangle, and that shows the audience that you can control that space. That's the idea there. Last is the hard version, the lawyer walk. I have to pronounce that carefully. I'm from the South, and so I say lawyer walk, and my staff at the speech lab laughs at me. But the idea there is that you are presenting much like a courtroom. Let's take this stuff out. Actually, can we just do that. Now we've got that back wall again with the blackboard. And what you might do, it's sort of like a really elongated speaker's triangle, sort of. So you might start, let's put our tables back in, here. You might start here with the introduction. Then you'll say things like, okay, here's my attention getter, now that you know this and this. So to begin, let's start out by discussing my first main point. And you're going to go here. So main point 1 will start here. About halfway through main point 1, you might slowly, and I do mean slowly and deliberately, start walking over this way until you get to that second X. Right? And so you're going to, let's put 1, it's hard to draw, 0.5. The second half of the first point, you might come over here and do that. Then as you move into your second point, you might get 1.5, 2, 2. Then you're going to go back over this way. While you're moving now, you're talking. That's very important. Some folks, for either this or the speaker's triangle, want to just sort of be silent while they make this trip. That's not the way you want to do it. Then you stay over here till about main point 2.5. I'm sorry, you're going to start 2.5 over here until you get to about 3 somewhere. You might go back, and then at the end, you're going to come back up here for your conclusion. Now, let me talk about it. That can be as clear as mud right there in the drawing, but the idea is that you are showing the audience that you can walk and talk at the same time. I mean, it sounds dumb, but really that's what you're doing here. If you think of like a courtroom movie or TV show, Law and Order or something, an attorney will often pace back and forth in front of the jury, but they don't do it in a distracting, fast way. I always tell students that the attorney walk or lawyer walk can turn into the crackhead walk real fast. If you're going too fast, you look like a tiger in a cage, right? You're just pacing back and forth and back and forth. But if you can control this pace, it shows that you're in control of everything that's happening in that room. That's your room while you're talking. I love using this one. When you're on your way, by the way, like going in this direction, I don't know why I can't draw now suddenly, but that's fine. If I'm going to over here from the left, you can put your hand, we're talking about hands in a second, but I could put my right hand in my pocket, and with my left hand I can gesture and hold notes. Then I could come over here and face the audience. Then as I go back, my left hand can go in my pocket, and the hand that's always closest to the audience is working and gesturing. By the way, when I'm walking, no matter where I'm walking, my head is always coming back to the audience. All right, so I'm never just going to just look the direction I'm walking nonstop. Sure, you glance back over, but no matter where you are on this path, you're looking back at the audience. So again, this is one of those more, it takes a little more practice, takes a little more anxiety management, but if you want to give it a shot, give it a shot. All right. Next up, gestures. I don't know what to do with my hands. This is a classic example. If you've seen Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby, this is why it's so important you plan gestures, or at least think about them before you come up and start talking. Again, why do we do this? Well, it keeps an audience's attention because they see movement. It shows that we have some confidence because if we're purposeful, we're again in control of our gestures, then we're in control of the moment, the room. And it does what's called an illustration, or gestures as illustrators. So if you think about that one, if I told you, if we're in a classroom on campus, and I said, how do I get to the closest bathroom from here? You'd be hard pressed to tell me how to get there without using your hands. You'd want to say things like, okay, you go out the room. Let's come back here. You want to do this. You go out, and then you go down the hallway there and just go ahead and take a right. And then when you get to the end of that hallway, it's just right around the corner. Like you're just kind of giving them this motion right around that corner, and then you'll be there. It's hard to do that without those gestures, and that's because they're illustrators. They help people understand what we're saying. But you should definitely want to be in control. I'm not asking you to direct the choir and gesture all the time, but do have a purpose for your gestures. If something is small, show us that it's small. If something's large, show us that it's large. If something is it's almost there, you can do that. If you want to show us movement, you can say that something started here. I call it rolling the ball. It's really hard to do on a computer camera. But imagine you have like a basketball here. So we started here, we went on to the next step, and then we finished with our final product. But it's like you've rolled that ball across the screen or the room in the case of a real setting. So being those sorts of that purposeful, using those purposeful gestures does help your audience follow along. What you don't want to do is hide your hands. Don't put them in your pockets or behind your back. And again, the only time that you might use your hand in a pocket is first, one pocket, and two, it's to show that you're relaxed, not to hide a shaking hand or something like that. Now, I've got some specific gestures that I want you to avoid, and I'll go through those here with you. Whoops, did not mean to do that. Here's the first one: parade rest. Yeah, it's nice in a military setting to stand at attention, for example, but that's not at attention, that's parade rest. But with the hands behind your back, speakers shouldn't do that because audiences don't like it. If audiences can't see your hands, they don't trust you. So you'll want to make sure that you're not doing behind the back. Pockets are pretty obvious. The next one's down there. Don't get lazy. This is the fig leaf. This is when you stand as though you're naked and you're covering yourself. All that does is make everybody look at your junk. You don't need that. Next up is the chicken wing. The first image there, we see a single chicken wing. Now don't stand like that while you're speaking, because if you really get into it, that wing starts to flap. God help you, don't do a double chicken wing like the guy there in the suit. That can really get out of control if you get into it again and start moving around the room. Next, the flesh wound. I've seen it a couple different ways. This is really the best illustration I could find, or any kind of image. But it's when people stand like that drawing is there, and they hold on to themselves. It's more of a security thing, but it's as though they've been stabbed in the arm and they're holding it in so that they can get through their speech before they get help. Then the hands over here, it's the same kind of thing, just in a smaller sense. But I've seen people crack their knuckles, all kinds of strange things with their hands because they didn't think about it, didn't plan on it. Next to last, the wall off. Don't wall yourself off. That one seems pretty obvious. And then the note statue. What I mean here, there's nothing wrong with what this speaker is doing, but we see her notes in her hand. What I can tell you I've seen so many times are people who will move around the room. This hand will gesture in a very effective way. They make eye contact, but this arm just is like it's in a cast. It's locked. And that's where that stays. You don't want to do that. You'll want to switch your hands for your notes. You want to not hold on to them with two hands. That doesn't feel, that's sort of like being walled off. If you're holding those notes out with two hands, it's still putting a barrier between you and the audience. Okay, next, last thing here. There are nonverbal elements of voice, and let's talk about those here. The words that come out of your mouth, that's the verbal element of your voice. That's verbal communication, the words that are said. But nonverbals are more important because the way you say something is as important or more important than what you say. We did the example, if you watched the intro speech, where we talked about you being with a significant other and asking what's wrong and the answer being nothing. Well, if you don't pay attention to volume, rate, pitch, inflection, that kind of stuff, with how someone says, no, nothing's wrong, you're not going to be in that relationship very long because you're not reading the symbols, the signs. So, if you think about volume for a speech, ask yourself if the back of the room can hear you if you're in a physical space. Here we have a different setting. We have microphones. Each microphone's a little different. So practice, go back and watch yourself, but make sure that I can hear you, because if I can't, then I can't grade you. And if the audience can't hear you, they can't be impacted by your speech. And that's counterintuitive, counterproductive for what we're trying to do. You definitely don't want to whisper and, sort of, okay, so I'm just like this, or scream. You don't need to yell at us. Now, I've got there unless it's for effect. And what I mean there is that a lot of times when people want to get attention on them as the speaker, they will get really loud. I don't like that. I like people who, when they want attention on them, they get really quiet. And prime example, like my dad growing up, whenever I would do something stupid and I knew I was going to get in trouble, he never yelled, but he would get down. Hey, Carl, I need to talk to you for a second. Come on. You knew it was over. Like you were in trouble. You had done it now. And so that lowered whisper, that lowered volume really let me know this is serious. So try that instead of getting louder. People that get louder, just that, they're usually just loud. People that are quiet, they're kind of scary. Maintain your volume throughout your sentences. That is so important. In our use of English in America, a lot of folks at the end of a sentence will drop their volume. So I'll say that same thing again, but I'll do it. In America, a lot of folks at the end of a sentence drop their volume. See how that was confusing? That might be really crucial. They drop their what? Their volume. Their what? Their volume. We need to make sure that we are staying consistent in terms of volume from the beginning to the end. Now, in the UK, for example, in their use of English, they go up at the end frequently. So it'll say things like, people might drop their volume at the end of a speech, or, that kind of thing. You don't need to do that, but don't go down. That's really the key thing. With rate, which is the next idea, find that middle ground again. Don't speed through this. You're not an auctioneer, but don't crawl through it either. Normally, if you're nervous, you're going to speak very quickly. What I'll tell you is, if that's you and you know you're nervous when you're getting in front of the camera here, practice speaking a little slower than you normally would. And when those nerves kick in, instead of taking you from normal to fast, it'll take you from slightly slower to almost normal, just above it maybe. It sounds strange, but give it a shot. I mean, really, when you're nervous, you usually talk fast, and you don't want that. Slow speakers, though, are sleepers, so you're going to put the audience to sleep if you're way too slow. I've only had this happen once that I can recall in 15 years of teaching at the college level. It was a guy in Tennessee who later came up to me and he said, I think I was a little slow, wasn't I? And I said, yeah, you were. And his response to me was, sorry, I'm really nervous, so I got real high before class. Like, all right, champ. But, with that, don't crawl, don't run. Just try to find that middle ground. Confidence is seen when you're reasonably rapid, which is just between average and fast. But when students evaluate professors, they say that deliberate, slower speaking rates are what they connect with the best. So find yourself somewhere in that big middle. Just don't go extreme. Speaking of extremes, pitch and inflection. You don't want to be in the middle and stay in the middle when it comes to pitch. That is monotone. Um, when we think of monotone speakers, we often think of a male, deeper voice. I don't know if you remember who Ben Stein is, if you've ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, from the 80s. Yeah, Bueller, Ferris Bueller. He's just got this really monotone, droning voice. That is monotone for sure. But in my experience, I usually see, not that men don't do it, but more women using monotone voice. And it's monotone, but it's at a high register. So it'll be things like, okay, so today we're going to talk about volume, and then we're going to move on from that, and we're going to talk about rate. And from rate, we're going to move to pitch and inflection. And it's that, we call it sing song. It just stays in this pattern that never changes. That's monotone as well. So be sure to practice and watch yourself to see if you are monotone. And if you are, try to be more natural. Again, you do this every day very naturally. You see on the screen there, if you have a positive emotion, your pitch is higher. If you have a negative emotion, your pitch is lower. It's like saying, if you're telling someone that they just won $1 million, you're probably not going to say it like, hey, oh yeah, by the way, yeah, you just won $1 million. No, you're going to be excited. Dude, what? You just won $1 million. Your voice goes up, your rate goes up, your volume goes up. But if it's something bad, you got to tell them that, I don't know, their dog just got hit by a car, God forbid. It's like, you don't even want to say it. You can feel the unwillingness in the voice. It's just, hey, sit down, man. Listen, your dog just got hit by a car. It's going to be all right though. And it's sort of that painful sound because it's a bad feeling. So when you are doing this, make sure that you keep that sort of natural shift. By the way, just real quick, if you want to really highlight something that you're saying, we talked about making sure to look at the audience while you say it, but also think about how volume, rate, pitch, inflection, and even pauses, which we'll get to next, can be used together to really put emphasis on something. So, if I want to tell you the most important thing in the lecture, but I don't want to say it's the most important thing, I can slow everything down and add in more pauses, drop the volume, make the pitch a little less chipper, and maybe even if it's not something important, boy, it can sound that way. Something like, chickens are birds, but they can't fly. Imagine being a bird that can't fly. What can we do? Right? I mean, who cares? It's chickens that can't fly. Yeah, we know. But it feels important because of the way it was delivered. So if you have something that really is important, deliver it in an important way. Last, with pitch and inflection, I've got the news reporter method of wrapping up segments. Here, if you've ever watched the news and someone is on location somewhere, they're outside the studio, they don't usually say at their wrap up like, I'm Carl Brown reporting live from Allendale. It's not how it usually works. It usually sounds something like, reporting live from Allendale, I'm Carl Brown. And so you've got this sort of cadence, you've got this shift in the pitch with different spots in that quick sign off. And again, I don't expect you to do it just like that. But if you're looking for an easy way to wrap up your speech and let the audience know you're finished, maybe the news reporter voice and style is useful. Last thing here, vocal fillers or vocalized pauses. First thing is, it's actually at the bottom, silent pauses are better than vocalized pauses. So what are those? Vocalized pauses are like, as, not like as, Jesus, simile, like, so, Now, with those, with that being said, it is fine if you say or like, those sorts of things. A little bit, that's fine, it's normal. It only becomes a problem when it becomes distracting. Normally, I won't count those unless it becomes distracting. And even then, I'll mark down like a timestamp, like you're at the 2.5 minute mark, and I will count your vocalized pauses for 1 minute. And that way you can see about how many you did in the whole speech. Multiply that by the total number of minutes, and you've got it. I mean, I've seen 40, 50, 60, 70 in 1 minute of these things. And most of the people that do it that frequently, especially, don't know they do it. They're not aware. They haven't watched themselves. So if that's you, make sure you're checking on yourself to see if this affects you. If it does, the only way to fix it is to be very aware. Now, where you really want to be aware is if you're beginning sentences with these vocal fillers every single time. So it'll say things like, today we're going to talk about a very important topic. That topic is vocalized pauses. Vocalized pauses are, and people will do this, and they'll also do it near the word and. Right, so it'll be, and you should know now that we are going to really talk about, you know what I'm talking about. So be aware of those things. That takes away from your credibility. It can be distracting to your audience. But if they're just a few here and there, it's not a big deal. Everybody does it on some level. Okay, so that wraps up chapter 7. Hope this was helpful. Again, as always, if you have questions, let me know. And I will see you next time from somewhere new.